Great. Today we have a session on preparing for IPv6 and BYOD with a single security policy. We have Andrew Yurkichenko and Rafael Maran-Abreu, who are our esteemed presenters today. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us. Before we get started, wanted to briefly mention the technical seminars that will be offered at Cisco Live London by our Cisco software subject matter experts. There are two seminars that focus on IPv6. There's IPv6 here for Dummies, an introduction to IPv6, and also IPv6 security that will be offered. You can register for that session or for either session by going to the Cisco Live London registration page. There's other great sessions here that we've included just in case you are attending Cisco Live and are interested. Today, we are very fortunate to have two subject matter experts. We have Andrew and Rafael with us today, and we have two great panelists, Ralph and David. Thanks so much for participating today and for your time. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items to mention. Please do use the Q&A panel instead of the chat window to ask questions. We are broadcasting the audio. If you prefer to use your phone, you can elect to receive a WebEx callback. If you have any issues on how to do that, please send me a note in the chat window and I'll assist. We will be posting the presentation slides in PDF, and I'll be sending out a link to the recording to everyone that registered for the event. If you have feedback or questions, don't hesitate to send me an email at ask_techadvantage@cisco.com. At the end of the webinar, you'll see a survey pop up. There's only 5 questions, and the majority of them are multiple choice. We try to make it easy. We ask that you do please fill that out. We pay very close attention to your feedback, and we want to ensure that you value the time that you spend here. We'd also like to collect information and your thoughts on future topics. We've taken many suggestions from attendees and have turned them into webinar topics, so we really do value your input. Last note before we get started, our next webinar is January 9th, and it will be focused on enhancing application performance with PFR. If you would like an invitation to the event, please let me know. You can put your email address in the chat window, and you have the opportunity to include your email address in the survey as well. We also have upcoming events and webinars posted on our website, which is go/TechAdvantage. Before I hand it over to Rafael here, I just wanted to mention that today we will be asking you, the audience, questions throughout the webinar through the WebEx polling feature that can be found in the WebEx panel. We will open the polling questions for 20 seconds. If you can reply to that, then we will post the results. But our speakers today will indicate when it is a polling question and when it is time for you to vote. So, Rafael, without much further ado, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Janelle, for the introduction. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Rafael Maranon, and I'm a product manager at Cisco for Enterprise Networking Software. In this webinar today, I will cover an introduction to IPv6, also bring your own device, and layer 2 domain security. Then Andrew will have the opportunity to provide more detail about the risk, threat, and solutions. Also, just to make this webinar more interactive, we will post some questions in the poll that you will see on your right. So what are the expectations for this webinar? Well, first of all, we expect you to be aware of the vulnerabilities and risks of deploying bring your own device in your corporation. And also, we expect you to understand how to mitigate them and also to protect the network accordingly. So what is bring your own device? So bring your own device, a phenomenon that recently appeared with the proliferation of a smart mobile device. And this refers employees who bring their own mobile device to the workplace and use them to access to company resources. So why is it important now? Mobile device is before, right? So,
Rafael, I'm sorry to interrupt you. One quick question. Have you moved through the agenda slide? That's the last slide that I see. I just want to make sure we're on the same slide.
Yeah, we are now I'm bringing on device slide.
Okay. Let me. There we are. Thank you. Yep. Now I can see it. Thank you.
Okay. We are good now, right?
We are. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So why bring your own device is important today? Because mobile devices before Well, before, expectation for the employees that bring the device to the workplace was just to be able to connect to the guest wireless network and navigate. However, today is different for several reasons. First of all, there are new business requirements, such as the need to use collaborative web application, and also the user wants to seamless access to corporative resources, no matter which device they use or where the device is connecting from. So also we can see how the lines between personal and professional life continue to blur. So in this case, security is no longer a question of how to keep people out. It's also a question about how to let them in. And the consequences for this phenomenon is that IT professionals must balance security and enablement so that users can collaborate with confidence. So today there are companies with more than 90% of the employees already using their own technology to access to corporative resources, such as email, file, database, or web applications. This tendency is so popular that bring your own device are growing to a speed that just in a few years, companies like Cisco, for example, we have more mobile devices connected than employees. And here we can see an article from Forbes commenting how is Cisco bring your own device deployment. This article, I believe, is from March 2012, and we already have as much smartphone and tablets as employees. And the growth is like more than 50 per year. So now that bringing your own device is finally a phenomenon, this is good for business? So the answer is yes. Bring your own device is actually very good for business because it increases employee productivity by giving them the opportunity to easily collaborate. Also provide flexibility with the option to work from home or other remote location that finally, ultimately, improve job satisfaction. Actually, if we look to the Cisco Connected World Report 2011, we can see that the employee prefer to work for companies that have more flexibility in terms of mobility, social media access, and the device choice. This report is a research where more than 3,000 young professional and college students were interviewed about behavior and expectation of work, next generation of workers. Actually, these employees say that in the report that they could even accept low-paying jobs in this condition are met. So we are hearing from a very particular behavior that is good for business, but only if you do it right. And I say that because bringing your own device requires a great deal of attention to security. In the same study, they mentioned that 3 of 5 employees believe that they are not responsible for protecting their corporative information and device. This part challenges IT professionals that need to figure out how to provide flexibility and security at the same time. Before continuing, let me ask you a question in the poll to understand what is the level of adoption in your corporation. So you will see on your right panel the poll. If you can quickly select some of the options, that would be great.
Yes, the polling is open. Hopefully you can see that. It's poll question number 1.
That's great. So we have a few more seconds. Okay, so probably we need more time, but we can see how one bring your own device per employees is normally the normal average. People use their smartphone for email, but also some of them they are also bringing their tablets so they can use some corporative application. One important piece of data to consider is that bring your own device is not only a phenomenon these days. I would say that this is a consistent phenomenon. If we look at internet traffic forecasts, all the key drivers remain consistent, but each of them are evolving in an interesting way. We can see how the number of devices will be 19 billion by 2016. it was predicted to be 15 billion by 2015 in the last year report. Also similar thing for the number of users growing from 3.1 billion by 2015 to 3.4 billion by 2016. And in the line with the media content from 1 million video minutes by 2015 and 1.2 million by 2016. So this confirms that the trend is consistent year after year, with internet users willing to navigate faster using primary video and from mobile device possible. One detail to consider is that modern devices support IPv6 and thus prefer IPv6 connectivity if we follow the RFS 5221. The good news is that IPv6 has been gaining momentum as the next generation IP, maturing over time while IPv4 address space was exhausting. Today, IPv6 is live, and over 2,000 global organizations officially registered last June to participate in the IPv6 official launch. But you may be asking, how are corporations today using and implementing IPv6? So, well, there are several ways to deploy IPv6 network. For example, Cisco Validated Design recommends to deploy options for several scenarios, like full dual stack and server load balance IPv6 to IPv4. Also, NAT 64 and Lisp. Many corporations are done with implementation, and others are planning for the next 12 months. Let me take here the opportunity to post another of the poll to see how is the level of IP deployment for the audience. Maybe we can have few more seconds, so you can click on your options.
Yep, the poll has now been opened.
Right.
And feel free to go ahead and vote.
Yeah, if we can leave more, like 20 or 25 seconds for the next poll, probably.
Certainly.
That would be great.
Okay, and I will go ahead and share these results.
Okay, interesting. So we have a 6% already done, the deployment, and most of them planning 12 months. This is actually very interesting piece of data because if we can see previous survey, for example, in July 2010, there were like 40% of the answer saying that there is no plan for IPv6 implementation. However, in March 2012, this was reduced by 25%, so only 15% they had no plan. Most of them they have already done or they're planning for within the 12 months. So this is a very interesting piece of data. So if employees want to bring their own device to the office and the network is ready for IPv6, where are the challenges here? So with the proliferation of mobility, layer 2 domain has become a primary importance. At the same time, this evolution has been raising a number of security and also scaling challenges like information theft and denial of service. How we approach this challenge? Sometimes layer 2 switches are referred as first hops, specifically when they are facing end nodes. From the security point of view, these switches are in a strategic position in the network that allow to secure the domain and optimize link operations. We understand link operation as this operation necessary for a node to communicate with its neighbor. However, I will let Andrew to provide later more detail about difference in similarity from a V4 and V6 protocol in terms of security. It is regularly stated that IPv6 is more secure than IPv4. However, the set of capability for IPv6 to simplify end system auto-configuration make it differently, and several types of attack of configuration error has been identified. Some of them, as you probably know, are man-in-the-middle attack, address theft, address spoofing, and denial of service attack. For many years, you see that Cisco has been providing a suite of Catalyst integrated security features, running the Catalyst switches to secure layer 2 operation for IPv4. In order to provide the same level of end node protection on IPv6 or dual stack network, these layer 2 switches need to add similar set of capability to address the IPv6 link operation. So free hub security is a suite of features designed specifically to address a IPv6 link operation vulnerability, as well as also address some scalability issues that we see in the layer 2 domain. Sometimes we think much in external threat, but vulnerability inside the domain are common, not only for rogue users, but also frequently because human failure for misconfiguration to the devices. Let me show you now all the set of IPv6 free hub security functionality, and those can be classified in 3 categories. We can see here core, advanced, and also scalability. Depending on the network requirement, this capability can be deployed actually in a phased manner. If we focus on the core set of functionality, those provide solid protection from rogue or misconfigured users, and those are RA-guard, DHCP, and the infrastructure IPv6 snooping. Let me get more detail on the core features that I think are very important. For example, for RA-guard is one of the core features of the solution, and this is a low operation on the layer 2 switch. To configure the switch port is spacing. So if we can see in the right of the picture, router advertisement received on any other port are actually dropped. So in the layer 2 switch, we configure which of the switch port are routing facing. Similar thing happened with the DHCP v6. In this case, we protect from rogue DHCP server. And this feature is intended to block DHCP reply or advertisement, which are not coming from DHCP server or relay. Also with the IPv6 free hub security snooping, in this feature actually it is an infrastructure need for RA-guard, but also is needed for the DHCP server. It's an instrumental link operation security feature that analyzes mainly control and data switch traffic, detect also IP address, and store update them in a binding table. The infrastructure feature for free hub security contain other sub-features that you probably know, like IPv6 address link, IPv6 ND inspection, and also IPv6 device tracking. And also, sometimes we see the binding wire or recovery table. So coming back to the previous slide, other features that we can find are in advanced feature. They are the source prefix guard. This one actually validates source address, and destination guard which validate destination address. From the scalability, two important features are RA throttling, which facilitates scale by converting multicast traffic into unicast, and also ND multicast suppress, the one that controls traffic necessary for proper link operation and improve performance. These last two features have become critical while deploying beyond device security policies, since they handle efficiently scalability issues. Before finalizing the part of and hand off to Andrew, I would like to pose one more question in the panel to see how important do you consider to be IPv6 security?
Great. So that third polling question is now open. Please go ahead and navigate to that polling panel so you can cast your vote.
Okay, so we have actually 45%, which is very important. Okay. Thank you for replying the poll. So finally, I would like to mention that the access layer is key to start protecting your network. This is because this is where the data is, also because it's the door to our network, and also because this is where the end users are, right? So with the transition to IPv6 picking up pace, I think it's critical to be aware of the vulnerabilities, understand how to mitigate them, and finally to protect the network accordingly. Now, I will hand over Andrew to get some info detail about the risk, threat, and also protocol and solution proposed.
Hello, everyone. And I think, Janelle, I would need the ball.
Yes. Yep. Let me pass it over to you.
Yeah. Cool. And while you're doing that, a very small advertisement. Besides the 2 sessions that Janelle mentioned, there's also another one which is going to be the breakout session that maybe you will find of interest. So that will be called IPv6 troubleshooting. So that's something where I will be speaking. So then if you are at Cisco Live, then definitely would be lovely to meet in real life.
Great. And Raphael, can you hand Andrew the ball, please, for some reason?
Yeah.
There we are. Thank you.
Okay. There you are.
Okay.
Perfect.
So we should have advanced to the next slide. And if we look at first hop security in IPv6, so Raphael already touched that it is kind of somewhat similar to the first hop security in IPv4. So what really is different with IPv6? So is there any difference? So first of all, the threats are usually related to topology. So they depend on how the network topology is built. So, and there the IPv6 offers probably the biggest difference from IPv4 in that the number of the available addresses on the signal segment is potentially very large.
And Andrew, just a quick note, if you could just speak a tiny bit louder, that would be great.
I'll try. Yeah.
Perfect.
So,
thank you.
Yeah. So the number of the neighbors on the segment can be potentially very large. The other part is the operation of the IPv6 itself. So it is different compared to IPv4. And how exactly is it different? So if we look at the link model in IPv4, then it was very, very DHCP server centric. So DHCP server practically had the full control over what happens in terms of the addressing parameters and in terms of the host address and routing assignment, right? So the only other option practically was to assign the addresses statically, which obviously is not an option in any production environment most of the time. So if we go to IPv6, then the link model changes. And in IPv6, there is a new mechanism of providing the configuration, which is stateless address router configuration. So the DHCP server is no longer the sole authority potentially controlling the operations on the link. So the link model in IPv6 becomes more distributed than the link model in IPv4. So with this comes a question, how do we enforce security in this model? So do we go with the distributed model or centralized security model? So do we verify the security between each and every pair of nodes in the segment, or do we go through the trusted intermediary? And before we go there, let's explore a little bit in more details the protocols that are run on this first hop link. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about the neighbor discovery. So the operation and the potential vectors for the attack. So the very first step that happens when the new node is connected to the segment is the router discovery. The host, in this slide, you can see the host A, when it joins the network, so when it connects the network cable, it sends a special type of ICMP message. So it sends the message called router solicitation. So it solicits all the routers on the segment to respond and to make themselves known so that the host can start using these routers as their default gateways. So the routers on the segment hear this message and then they reply with the advertisement. So they advertise their presence to the host, and the host then subsequently takes the address of the senders of this message and it starts to use that as a default gateway. So from here we can see already the first potential vector, right? So if we have some second party, so if we have an attacker who is sitting on the segment, that attacker can also potentially hear the request from the new node to tell what the routers are. And this attacker can send the router advertisement message towards this new node, this new computer that joined the network. So as a result, the new node will configure the wrong address as a router. So the attacker will get all of the traffic from node A, which is destined to the remote subnets. And from there on, as Raphael said already, basically it's up to C to decide what to do with that traffic. So either it can just black hole all the traffic, so that will create a denial of service situation, or it can do something more subtle. It can copy the traffic and relay the traffic to the real gateway. So with this, the user will think that everything functions as expected, but the attacker will have a copy of the user's traffic. So depending on whether the traffic is encrypted, it may or may not be a big problem. Now, as part of this exchange of router solicitation and router advertisement, the host also performs so-called stateless address auto configuration. So in the router advertisement message, the routers not only send the fact that they are there and they're present, they also send the prefix, so the network address for the segment that the host is attached on. So this allows the host to immediately configure their own address. So they can take the prefix and then they can add so-called interface identifier, with which then they can form the routable IPv6 address. So that is something that is decentralized and different from IPv4. So in this case, obviously, again, the attacker can pretend that he's a router and he can affect the parameters that are received by the user. So in case the attacker sends this spoofed message, then the user will configure, the new host will configure a different address, and therefore, again, that may create either man-in-the-middle scenario or denial of service attack, depending on how the attacker decides it should happen. Address resolution. This part of the protocol is somewhat similar to ARP in IPv4, with one big difference, again, that it operates using ICMP version 6. So it doesn't use the separate Ethernet protocol like ARP in IPv4 does, but it runs as part of the IPv6 protocol itself. So whenever the host needs to send the packet to another host on the same segment, what it does is that it sends the neighbor solicitation, so which is an analog to the ARP request in IPv4, to get the mapping of the IPv6 address to the layer 2 Ethernet address, so the address to which the host A then will send the packet to. And the host B, seeing this request, basically it will reply with the neighbor advertisement, so it will reply with the mapping of IPv6 address into the Ethernet address. As part of the request, host A also includes its link local address, its link layer address, sorry, and this way, in a single exchange, both of the hosts can communicate. So both of the hosts know each other's link layer addresses, and they can communicate. So what happens if we have, again, the third party, which is maliciously or not, tries to interject into communication? So in this case, the attacker can try to claim the address of the victim. So it can reply instead of the victim. If it's faster to reply, then the host A will be using the wrong Ethernet address in this case. So, and then the attacker will get again the traffic of the host A. So this traffic will again, what will happen with it? It again depends on the choice that attacker has. So either they can just black hole it, or they can again perform the man in the middle. So that part is somewhat similar to IPv4. In IPv4, again, the ARP behavior is pretty much similar, except that it's running on a different Ethernet protocol. One mechanism that is specific for IPv6 in some regards is that the host, before using the IPv6 address, they have to verify that this address is unique. So to do that, they send a request for this address to all hosts on the segment. So they are trying to figure out, well, I'm about to use this address, so is anyone already using this address? So if someone with this address is already present on this segment, so uses the address, then the neighbor solicitation for this address will trigger them to reply. And that's precisely how duplicate address detection works, that the host sends the neighbor solicitation, and then after a very short timeout, effectively, if no one replied, that means that we can start using this address. So that means that there's no one on the segment that already uses the address. But of course, well, no one replies to this until there is an attacker who does reply. So as a result, the host thinks that there is already someone else using the address, and the host cannot use this address. So the duplicate address detection mechanism typically blocks the host. And depending on which operating system we're talking about, which stack we have, the behavior can be different from just displaying a warning to completely blocking the usage of the IPv6 address. So, and obviously with this behavior, the attacker, if they can hear all the hosts coming into the segment, they can effectively block IPv6 communication on the segment altogether. So if we think that every new host needs to perform duplicate address detection before using the IPv6 address, then the attacker can see pretty much all of the duplicate address detection requests. So they can disable IPv6 by and large on the segment pretty much if left alone. So how do we tackle this threat? So how do we try to mitigate them? So one of the approaches that was tried was the so-called SAN, so the distributed layer 2 security model, where SAN is really an extension to the ICMPv6 and an extension to the neighbor discovery protocol. And being distributed, it has its pros and cons, right? So the advantages of such an approach includes the lack of central administration, right? So you don't really need to have so much of the central operation, and as a consequence as well, there is no single point of failure as such. But on the other hand, the SANs and the distributed operations in general, they include a little bit more difficulty in terms of deployment, because you have to touch all of the nodes to be able to run this. So what does Secure Neighbor Discovery provide? It basically allows to have each node on the link to take care of their own security. So it allows to verify the legitimacy of the router by means of cryptography. Using, again, the cryptographic mechanisms, it allows to verify the claim of the address ownership. On the other hand, Secure Neighbor Discovery is not really a replacement for IPsec nor 802.1x, so it doesn't authenticate the user that connects to the segment. So that's important to know. Nor as well it touches any of the other keys, so it doesn't provide protection for DHCP and TP and, well, all the other services that may be present on the network. So it's really more, as I said, an extension to the network discovery protocol with a couple of new messages. So certificate path solicit and certificate path advertise. So it's really a distributed mitigation mechanism. And as I said, it's more an add-on to the neighbor discovery, and it does not provide the end-to-end security. So that's important to know if we're talking about the SAND. So talking about the address ownership, right? So we were talking that SAND provides the proof of address ownership claim. So how do we do that? We do that by means of cryptographic operation. The host generates the public and private key pair, and then essentially they sign their public key, and part of that signature becomes that host's address. So when they send the message to the other hosts on the network, they can include the proof of ownership of this address, being the public key. And the receiving host can then use that proof of ownership to verify the ownership of the address on the host. So that's more or less in very short detail how the address ownership proof works. And if you're interested in further details, then the RFCs that I mentioned in the previous slides show how exactly it is computed. Now, the other operation I was talking about is router authorization. How do we do this part? To perform this, we need to enroll the router with the certificate authority, and we need to distribute the certificate authority certificate, so the key, to the host. So if you ever used HTTPS, and well, I pretty much can bet that everyone did so, well, because a lot of websites are encrypted, then the mechanism that is used is essentially very similar. So as part of the router discovery process, when the host receives the router advertisement, it no longer blindly trusts the router advertisement, but instead generates a challenge in a way. So it says, I trust the CA, but I don't trust you without the proof that you're a real router, and please give me some more credentials to ensure that I can use you. In reply to this message, the router sends the certificate path advertise, in which it provides the certificate signed by this certificate authority. The host, having previously obtained the certificate of the CA, it can verify that indeed it was that certificate authority which issued the certificate to the router. So all of this looks great, but one challenge with the CA operations is whenever you start to move the devices between different administrative boundaries. And especially that is true in case of BYOD, because that's the very definition of the BYOD, is that the device from one administrative domain gets into another administrative domain. So really, the challenge besides that, SAND also has to be deployed on pretty much all of the nodes in order to be beneficial, because it's pretty much like if two people need to speak with each other, then both of them need to know the language. So if only one of them knows the language that they decide to speak with each other, they cannot still communicate. So that's one of the challenges with the distributed security in this case. So the question is, do we really try and move to a different deployment model? So something where we have a more central role, so where we have a trustee intermediary who can help us with the security. And that's where the centralized security model comes to rescue. So it's, in a way, it has mirrored advantages and disadvantages compared to the distributed model, right? So we do have a central point where we need to maintain the security and administer it. So that brings the ease of maintenance, the ease of administration, but that as well brings the single point of failure in some scenarios. So really, we're talking about the smart switch when we talk centralized security. So the smart switch is something that needs to be in the security perimeter, so between the hosts that are potentially untrusted, and the hosts that are so the central part of the network. So, and essentially, depending on where the switch is, it will depend on how effective it can be in terms of protecting the hosts from the rogue or misconfigured endpoints in the network. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about the centralized security technology. So first one is the array guard. So the array guard is a mechanism which basically is an access list blocking the router advertisements sent by the hosts according to your policy. So depending on the scenario, it can be either configuration-based or learning-based or challenge-based. And then the algorithm of functioning of the array guard is fairly simple. So array guard checks whether this host, this port is allowed to issue the router advertisement, and if that host and/or port are administratively allowed to do so, then it just bridges the router advertisement towards the host. If this entity is not allowed to send the router advertisement, then this router advertisement is blocked. So a very simple example of somewhat an array guard-like approach can be just a port access list. So in this slide, you see an example configuration which combines the array guard and the DHCP guard-like functionality. So this is a very simple example which is pretty much a must-have on any of the devices, even if they don't support the full-fledged array guard or DHCP guard features. That is something that you really need to start with in terms of security on your devices. Now, one other thing about IPv6 is that the fragmentation in IPv6 is done differently than in IPv4. And in order to get to the next upper layer protocol, you need to parse the entire header chain. So that creates some of the challenges in terms of matching the packets. So it is possible to have a situation in which you cannot really conclusively determine which so whether this particular fragment is the legitimate protocol or whether this fragment can be malicious. So for that reason, basically that's a local policy decision based on so local criteria. You define whether you are allowing those kinds of fragments or whether you're dropping them. Now, as part of infrastructure features, we need to know which device is connected to which port. So address watch is part of the IPv6 snooping, which basically allows us to see which device is connected to which port. And how exactly can we track that? Well, so there is multiple ways to do that. So as we build the table, so when we already have the table, we can maintain that table by means of looking at what traffic does the device send. And then periodically we can use the neighbor solicitation, pretty much like the neighbor discovery in IPv6 uses that basically to maintain the state of that table, to maintain the freshness of that table. So we will periodically probe the devices that don't send the traffic, that we don't have the indications about them being alive. We can probe them using the neighbor solicitations. And if the device answers the neighbor solicitation with the neighbor advertisement, then we know that that device is still alive, so we can keep that entry in the table. But of course, the question is, how do we build that table in the first place? So in order to build a table, we can use multiple mechanisms. So one of the kind of fundamental mechanisms is that we can use the duplicate address detection messages in order to populate the table, right? Because we know that if this address doesn't exist yet in the table and we see the neighbor solicitation for this address, then, well, chances are that this will be the new host. So if there is no address in the table, then we opportunistically can say that, well, yes, this is a new host and we are going to allow it. So other means to monitor and to populate the table includes snooping on the DHCP version 6 exchanges. So whenever the hosts get the addresses via DHCP, then we can as well even do more reliable operations by taking the addresses out of the DHCP version 6 messages. Now, we have the table that we built, right? So we can use that table to enforce various sorts of policies. And the first of these policies is really IP source guard. So the source guard, as maybe the name hints, basically allows us to ensure that the hosts are not spoofing their source address. So a few earlier slides, I was talking about populating the table. So as we have this binding table populated, we can assert about the presence or absence of the certain hosts on the segment. So we can, as the traffic comes in and as the traffic is about to be switched, we can verify that the host that sends the traffic, so the source IPv6 address, that it is indeed present in the table. So the question is, did we previously see this host registering and going through the whole process of IP address assignment or not? So if we did see that, then we have that host address on the table at the correct VLAN and the interface. So in that case, we can let the address, we can let the packet through because we know that it is a legitimate host. So in case we don't have the entry, then we can try to learn it. In case we have that entry with a different VLAN and maybe different MAC address, then we are pretty sure that the host is probably trying to be spoofed, so we can drop that packet. So if we don't have the entry, then depending on the configuration, we can either just drop that packet again as a matter of policy, or we can punt this packet to the control plane, where the control plane will try to populate the table and do best effort. In that, it would try either to query the DHCP server and see if that address has been assigned from the DHCP, or it could do the best effort discovery using the DAD neighbor solicitation. So if it will do the DAD for this address, then the host, if it legitimately uses that address, every host will perform the reply to the duplicate address detection neighbor solicitation. So that will allow us to populate the table, and subsequent packets will go through. That is one of the ways to use this table. Another very useful feature involves the destination of the packets, right? So I was talking earlier about the fact that the IPv6 has this very peculiar feature that we have 64 bits most of the time for the host address. So potentially that can cause the possibility for the denial of service attack in case you do, for example, something like in IPv4, you would do an nmap scan against the segment. So in IPv6, if you do an nmap scan against the segment, well, not only that will take forever, but also that potentially can exhaust in some situations the neighbor cache on the router. So it will exhaust the router memory. The destination guard can help with that because as we saw earlier, the switch has already populated the binding table. So it knows which host is connected and which host it is not connected. So if we have the first hop being layer 3 switch, then really it does not even need to perform the neighbor discovery for the destinations as such, because it already has that information up front, right? So all of the information about the attached devices is a binding table. So that allows to just avoid resource starvation in case someone is scanning the subnet. So a couple of real-world facts, because I was involved into IPv6 deployment at several Cisco Lives for several years by now, and starting from last year, we started to use the wireless LAN controller software, which involved the first hop security features. And that allowed to have much less headache in terms of administration and in terms of monitoring the network. So we still did monitor the network, but nonetheless, with the first hop security features, the ease with which the ease with which the network was operated has increased dramatically. So, and one thing to note from this slide, so the numbers you see on the slide is the San Diego event. And the interesting part is pretty much 90% of the devices were dual stack capable. So that means that even if you don't have the plan to deploy the IPv6 internet access in your organization, then for sure you cannot just ignore IPv6 outright. So you still need to have a plan on how you tackle the devices which are IPv6 enabled, which get onto your network. So, and with this really, I think there are a few takeaways, right? So I'll pass the ball to Rafael, and he will conclude the presentation. So, and if he wants to add something, he will add something.
Yeah. So basically, just a takeaway to finalize. Just you need to consider that bring your device bring new security and scalability challenge. And layer 2 domain is an important point to start providing security solutions. So this is something that modern devices that prefer IPv6 connectivity. So it's something to consider. At the same time, layer 2 mobility environment are very, very vulnerable to those different type of attacks, theft information, and that's something that we need to care. The good news is that we have already a solution in the market. So free hub security Cisco solution provides this protection, and actually in IPv6 or dual stack network, that actually also manage the wireless scalability. So with this, I think that's all.
And if you can go to the next slide, Rafael, we'll just do a quick thank you.
Yes, one of the things, also for further information, you can find here some of the good links about the white paper, documentation, and also community support. And also feel free to reach out to me or to Andrew if you have any further questions.
That's great. Yep, thank you. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Andrew and Rafael for our great presentation, and to our esteemed panelists today. We ask that you do please complete the post-event survey. We really hope that you spend a moment to fill out the questions. Next webinar, just a quick reminder, hopefully you'll be interested in enhancing application performance with PFR, and you can see the link there with Go TechAdvantage. You can register there, or you can contact me for more information. And you can also follow us on Twitter at GetYourBuildOn. Thanks again, everyone. I'll leave this session open just for a minute. I think we have some questions going on in the Q&A panel, so we'll leave that going for just a minute. But thanks, everyone, for calling in, and we'll end the video portion here. So thanks, and hopefully you enjoyed the session.